In fiction, a plot hole is when an event or action doesn't make sense within the established storyline. Think of it this way. Anytime you're watching a movie and you think,
"The fuck is this?"
chances are you've stumbled upon a plot hole, even if you can't explain why. With that in mind, let's take a look at Man of Steel. This film is my favorite Superman movie thus far, but it does suffer from a few plot holes that, if filled, would have made the movie better. Let's see if we can learn something about why these plot holes made it into the film's final cut, and how we could fill them to make the movie better. Up until the point when Clark seeks out the priest for advice, no mention had been made about Clark being a religious person. At several points in the film, Clark is put in various scenes to heighten the religious symbolism, but nothing tells the viewer that Clark is a Christian. So, for advice on Zod, Clark should have sought out the Jor-El hologram instead, especially since the film had established Jor-El as a reliable source of information about all things Krypton. Two reasons might explain why this scene was left in the final cut. One, they wanted to either hit the viewer over the head with the Savior comparison, or two, as how it should have ended pointed out so comedically, they were afraid that going to Jor-El would result in Clark using his small spaceship to create a singularity and send the Kryptonians back to the Phantom Zone, thus ending the movie earlier and anticlimactically. I provided a link for the How It Should Have Ended clip below if you'd like to make a quick detour and check out that video. To obtain the codex, why wouldn't Zod offer to let humanity live? Why insist that Krypton needed to exist, and not just Kryptonians? The answer to this can be inferred by premises established throughout the film, but when first watching the movie, I was left wondering why Zod was so determined to kill off all of humanity. Both plot holes could have been avoided by better using Jor-El's consciousness. Instead of going to a priest for advice, Clark should have gone to his birth father. Going to a Jor-El would not lead to an abrupt end to the movie like was shown in the How It Should Have Ended clip. In fact, going to Jor-El would have strengthened the film. The hologram could have briefly explained to Clark that Zod, despite being a great general, was a megalomaniac who dogmatically adhered to Krypton's failed bloodlines. This had somewhat been established to the viewer, but Clark was unaware of the full extent of Zod's devotion. Focusing on the bloodlines is key. The Jor-El hologram could have argued that Zod would rather destroy Clark and what he stood for, which is overturning Krypton's bloodlines, even if Clark gave up the codex. When Clark inevitably asked his birth father what he should do, the hologram could have worried about the size of Zod's army. Jor-El would have advised that any confrontation with Zod would result in many human deaths, and perhaps even Clark's. Not wanting to risk people's lives, Clark would rather try to talk with Zod. The hologram could have even told Clark how to create the singularity, just in case Clark felt he had no other choice but to return the Kryptonians to the Phantom Zone. This film is all about choice, and Clark testing not only his physical limits, but his moral limits as well. Clark needs to determine how far he's willing to go to protect the people of Earth. Giving Clark the entire picture would have increased his dilemma, which would have only increased the tension. His struggle would have been transformed from physical combat to ethics. Remember, Superman is interesting because he is a moral, godlike character who struggles with not knowing when to use extreme force. Not having any personal experience with Zod, Clark could have tried appealing to Zod's humanity, ignorant that Zod had none. While testing Zod's intentions, Clark would tell Zod that he could have the codex if he spared the planet. During the scene when Zod reveals that the people of Earth needed to die, Clark should have asked why. Zod could have replied with any number of dismissive remarks, perhaps even posing a question like, "You concern yourself more for these humans than your own kind?" At this point, Clark would question why Zod hated humans so much. More than happy to reply, Zod would ask Clark what there is to love about such a chaotic and disorderly race. At this point, Clark would recall what Jor-El said about the bloodlines, and Clark would question if Zod intended to destroy humanity out of spite for what Kal-El was and what the El family did, which was steal the codex and taint the bloodlines. Heresy, as Zod would say. Zod could have given a dismissive smirk instead of blatantly lied. Clark would then understand that Zod saw humanity as a metaphor for chaos, and an inevitable outcome of Jor-El's treachery. Humanity's freedom leads to chaos, from Zod's perspective. And by Kal-El being the product of a natural birth, Zod sees the foolishness of Jor-El's treachery every time he looks at both Clark and humanity. So, both Clark and humanity need to be destroyed. However, Clark's decision to kill Zod would still need development. Zod's attack on Martha, and all the destruction and death that occurred in Smallville, would have more clearly been the events that convinced Clark that it was worth using the Phantom Drive to create the Singularity. Changing the role of the Jor-El hologram would have increased the importance of the fight between Clark and Zod's troops. If Clark had sought advice from Jor-El, every scene between that talk and when he told General Swanwick about the Phantom Drive would have built his certainty that Zod needed to be stopped by any means necessary. This would have played into the theme of choice within the film, and would have more clearly explained why Clark was so willing to endure the destruction of Metropolis if it meant defeating Zod. Remember, Clark's saving the planet and all of humanity. This would have also built up to Superman's desperate final confrontation with Zod. Killing someone with your own hands is more difficult mentally than simply devising a plan to kill someone. Seeing that Zod would stop at nothing to destroy the El Legacy, a legacy Zod saw every time he looked at a human, Superman's last desperate act would have hit even harder with the audience, as we would have better seen that the choice to kill followed from a tense internal struggle about how far Clark needed to go to save humanity. Clark would have more clearly gone from trying to negotiate with Zod, to believing that Zod posed a great threat and needed to be stopped, to finally understanding that the only way to save the people of Earth from Zod was to kill. By giving Clark all the information up front about how to theoretically defeat Zod, Clark's impossible situation would have been established earlier, and all the destruction that occurred, including Clark's decision to kill Zod, would have been easier for audience members to understand. Don't force symbolism into a story, as anything forced tends to lead to plot holes. If the symbolism doesn't take shape by the character's actions, then change the actions so they better fit the desired symbolism. Assuming your audience is intelligent is generally a good thing. However, you need to give the audience enough pieces of the puzzle so they can put the puzzle together. It shouldn't take several times to fit all the pieces of the film together. In the case of Man of Steel, fixing one plot hole would help alleviate the other, as going to Jor-El for advice on Zod would have set Clark on the path of that of an investigator, one searching to figure out Zod's character. The more Clark figured out, the more the audience would understand why Zod held such hatred for humanity. Thank you so much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. Let me know in the comments if you found this video helpful or interesting, or if you disagree about something, or if you have a question or suggestion for a future video, or really about anything. While you're at it, and since you've made it this far, you'd be helping me out greatly if you hit the like button. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more, please hit the subscribe button. As of right now, my job as a full-time high school teacher prevents me from releasing videos more than once a month. In time, I hope to raise this number. But in the meantime, I invite you to return on the first Wednesday of next month for the next post. Thank you again for watching, and I hope you have a great day.